Hey, this is Mr. Buss, and the video here is going to walk you through the in-class lecture I did on chemistry you need to know for AP Bio, well, some of the chemistry, and then the latter part of the video will show what we did in class in terms of looking at the magic sand and some of the solutions that I had prepared and so on. So behind me on the board, I just have a water molecule. So we're going to talk about three different types of bonds: polar covalent bonds, ionic bonds, and nonpolar covalent bonds. So water molecule is the first one, and when we look at a water molecule, it's made up of one oxygen and two hydrogen atoms. But before we get to that, let's just take a look at the oxygen atom first. So it has a nucleus, and I just put in all these red dots representing protons. Protons are in the nucleus. Each one of these red dots or protons has a +1 charge. The neutrons are the green dots. We're going to ignore them. They do add mass to the atom, but they're not going to be relevant for what we're talking about. The nucleus has 8 protons. Because it has 8 protons, it's going to have 8 electrons. Now, electrons are hard to pinpoint, but we do know that they occur or exist in various energy shells, orbitals. I'll just call them, for the purpose of AP Bio, I'll just call them rings. So the first 2 electrons are going to go in the first ring, and the first ring can only hold 2. So 2 electrons in the first ring fill it up. And then all of the rings outside of that, now oxygen only has one other ring outside of that, but all the other rings outside of that for other atoms and so on want up to 8, or can hold up to 8. So we're going to go 2 for the first one, and then because this has 8 total, that means that the remaining 6 go in the outer ring. And they don't sit in these locations. I just drew them like this because it's easy to look at then. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, oxygen wants 8. It wants 8 electrons in its outer ring. It's called the octet rule, okay? And so in order to do that, it can share electrons with other atoms. And so in the case of water, hydrogen atom, which is only 1 proton and 1 electron, doesn't have a neutron. A hydrogen atom has 1 electron, and it can link up, and that's called a covalent bond. It can link up and start to share. Covalent is sharing its electron with oxygen here. And another hydrogen atom can do the same thing here. It can link up and begin to share its electron with oxygen. So oxygen, when it's sharing electrons with hydrogen, and you look at its outer, the nucleus stays the same. The nucleus still has just 8 protons. But if you look at the outer shell now, or outer ring of electrons, it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So oxygen is happy, right? It's got its 8 electrons. Hydrogen is also happy because, as we knew here, you can only put 2 electrons in the inner shell or inner ring. Well, hydrogen can consider both of those its own. And so hydrogen has its ring filled up, and oxygen has its ring filled up. So it's stable. Now, how stable is it, and how equal is the sharing? Okay. Well, oxygen has what's called an electronegativity of 3.5. Okay. That just is a relative number when we compare atoms to each other. How strong is the attraction for electrons? How much does it want electrons? And it's got a higher number than H, or hydrogen. Hydrogen is 2.1. Well, the difference is 1.4. So what? Well, that difference puts it in a realm of being significant. So the difference is significant enough that oxygen, sharing electrons with hydrogen, hydrogen's electron is going to spend most of its time around oxygen, and sometimes around hydrogen. Why? Because of oxygen's greater electronegativity, and it makes sense because oxygen has more protons in the nucleus. It's got a stronger attraction here than the 1 proton that hydrogen has. And same with this, right? So this electron of hydrogen is going to spend most of its time around oxygen and some of its time around hydrogen. And so because electrons are negatively charged, if oxygen has electrons spending more time around it, oxygen is going to have a slight negative charge. in order to show a slight charge, because that would be a full charge if I just left it like that, I have to use this symbol there. So oxygen has a partial negative charge in a water molecule. I didn't mention, so molecules are when atoms are bonded together. So this is a water molecule made up of oxygen and hydrogen atoms. So the oxygen atom of the water molecule has a partial negative charge. And each hydrogen, because it's hardly ever getting electrons around it, it's mostly significantly just got one proton, which has a positive charge. Mostly there's just a slight positive charge around here since the electrons are not going around the proton very much. Same as here. So water molecule is a polar covalent molecule. Unequal sharing of electrons results in partial positive and partial negative charges. And that allows water molecules to do a lot of interesting things. So if I had another water molecule over here, which end of the water molecule do you think would be facing the oxygen atom? Would the hydrogen end of the water molecule or the oxygen end of the water molecule be facing this side? Well, if this is negative, and we know opposites attract, we would probably have the hydrogen ends of the water molecule, which are partially positive, facing the oxygen. So this would be the oxygen, hydrogen, hydrogen. And what would occur would be a very weak bond, but a significant bond, called hydrogen bond. Even though it occurs between an oxygen atom and a hydrogen atom, it's called a hydrogen bond. What kind of bonds were these? Remember, these were polar covalent bonds. So the bonds within the water molecule are called polar covalent bonds, unequal sharing of electrons. Hydrogen bonds are weak attraction between water molecules that are significant when they add up. You might also maybe have a water molecule over here. Well, the oxygen end, I'm just drawing them smaller. The oxygen's the bigger atom. The oxygen end would have a partial negative charge, and you could form a hydrogen bond there. And so when you get water molecules, which are liquid and have motion around each other, they're constantly moving and snapping into place, so to speak, and finding the correct orientation to create or form, for a brief moment in time, hydrogen bonds. And so when you get enough of these, like at the surface of water, it's why insects can walk on water, right? Because as they, well, some insects, when they push down on the water, they're pushing down on the molecules which are not giving way, because these hydrogen bonds, these weak hydrogen bonds between molecules, are kind of forming a link. And of course, if the insect is heavy enough, if the object is heavy enough, it doesn't work for us, right? We're going to push right through those hydrogen bonds, but they have a significant attraction. That's why water molecule or water droplets are spherical and so on. So cohesion, it's a property of water. Water molecules stick to each other. Water is considered a sticky molecule because it sticks to itself. Adhesion, water molecules can stick to other things that are polar, okay? Surface tension, high specific heat. It takes a lot of energy to boil water to break all those hydrogen bonds. Okay, so a lot of interesting things going on with hydrogen bonds in water. So that's water, polar covalent molecule. Okay, next, let's talk about another type of chemical bond. And this type of chemical bond is going to be an ionic bond. Okay, so we have two atoms, sodium and chlorine. There's more going on in the nucleus here, so they have larger nucleus, more protons, therefore more electrons. Sodium has 11 protons in the nucleus, so if you count up all the red dots there, there's 11. I can't remember, I think it has like 12 neutrons, don't quote me on that, but it might, you don't have to have the same number of neutrons as protons, especially as the atoms get larger. All right, so since there's 11 protons in the nucleus, there's going to be 11 electrons going around the nucleus. And again, just like with water, the first 2 electrons go in the inner ring, and then the next 8 go in the next ring. Well, 2 plus 8 is 10, so we got one more. Unfortunately for sodium, because it would have been perfectly happy to just have 8 in its outer ring, but it's got this one extra one. Its 11th electron is in the next ring out, just keeps going out further and further and further. So sodium's unhappy, and instead of trying to gain 8 electrons to have 8 in its outer ring, it's just going to try to drop this one and call this its outer ring. Okay, well, along comes chlorine. I don't remember, well, I guess I can count how many protons it has, how many electrons it has. So it has 1, 2, plus 8 is 10, right? Plus 7 more is 17. So chlorine has 17 protons, 17 electrons. It almost fills up completely this third ring, right? So 2, 8, and 7. If it could only get one more electron, it would be perfectly happy. Well, sodium wants to totally ditch this one, right? So that electron is going to go all the way over here, and chlorine's actually going to get the electron. So now sodium has lost an electron. Okay, well, it's no longer a sodium atom, it's now a sodium ion, because it doesn't have the right number of electrons anymore. It's lost one. And if it loses an electron, it loses that charge of the electron. So now it has an unequal number of protons and electrons. So if it has 11 protons, that's a plus 11 charge, but only 10 electrons, it's got an extra plus 1 charge, right? Because it has one more proton than electrons, and protons are positively charged. Chlorine, different story, got an electron which is negative, so it has one more electron than it does protons, so chlorine is a minus 1 charge. So I would usually just write this as Na plus to signify that it's a sodium atom that has become a sodium ion that has lost an electron. And this would be, I just write Cl minus. Chlorine atom has become a chlorine ion. You could have molecules become, do this as well. So molecules can just lose an electron too, not just atoms. All right, so ionic bond. If this salt were put in water, what would happen to it? Well, it would dissolve. Why would it dissolve? Because of the fact that it has this charge, right? So water is a polar molecule, remember? Water has these partial charges, partial positives, partial negatives. Well, what's important is that it has a charge, right? And so if you get sodium chloride, table salt, put into water, the water molecules will surround these things and they will dissolve, right? So which end of the water molecule would surround the sodium atom? Well, sodium atom is positively charged, so the oxygen ends of water molecules which have a partial negative charge would be surrounding. So here's a water molecule. Again, oxygen has a partial negative charge. So you would surround this with water molecules and it would dissolve it. Which end of a water molecule would surround the chlorine? Well, the hydrogen end, because chlorine is negatively charged, and the hydrogen, right, has a partial positive charge, and opposites attract. So you would start to surround these things and they would dissolve in water. So I should mention the electronegativity part. Sodium has electronegativity of 0.9, chlorine has electronegativity of 3.0. Difference is 2.1. Remember, with water, the difference is 1.4. I don't have to know anything really about these numbers, but the difference is greater. Therefore, chlorine has a stronger pull relative to sodium, much stronger. And so again, that results in this ionic bonding. It's a significant enough number that means it's going to be an ionic bond, which means that electrons are transferred. The result is a positive negative charge. Okay, the third type of bond we're going to talk about. So we've talked about water molecules, which are polar covalent. We talked about salt, which is ionic. Third is going to be another covalent bond, but it's going to be not a polar bond. It's going to be equal sharing. Okay, so we're going to use the example of a hydrocarbon. Hydrocarbon is hydrogen and carbon. I just drew ethane, which is 2 carbon atoms. This could be a much longer chain of carbon atoms, so they just keep going further and further on, but because I didn't want to draw a ton of carbon atoms, just did 2 of them, and I put hydrogen atoms around them. Okay, so C2H6. Carbon's an interesting atom for biology students to study because it has 6 protons, 6 electrons, meaning that you get 2 here, and then here you get 4, meaning in order to have 8, it really needs to have 4 bonds. And so that's a lot. So carbon atoms can form lots of different molecular shapes and structures of larger organic molecules because of the fact that it has the opportunity to have so many chemical bonds. Okay, so in this case, these are all single bonds. So this carbon atom is sharing an electron here, sharing with hydrogen here, here, and here. And then again this one, sharing with hydrogen, 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 and another carbon atom here. So like this one, you know, is considered to have 8 bonds because you get 8 electrons in the outer ring because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on here. So this is a pretty stable molecule, and it's a non-polar covalent, equal sharing. The electronegativity numbers are similar to each other. Hydrogen 2.1, carbon 2.5, difference is 0.4. And again, in AP Bio, we don't have to memorize the number differences and what they mean exactly, but we just know that this is less. It's different, so carbon has a slightly stronger pull, but it's going to be considered not significant enough to cause any charges or partial charges here. So, what does this mean? What's this all about? Well, in the lab, we look at various substances that are polar, nonpolar, and ionic. And the important thing to remember is that things that have a charge, like water and salt, tend to work well together, dissolve in each other, mix better together. Things that are nonpolar covalent are water-fearing. In terms like hydrophobic, this molecule would be hydrophobic. It wouldn't interact well with water because water has a charge and this doesn't. So things that are hydrophobic, like in the lab, we're going to look at mineral spirits and vegetable oil. Those mix together really well because they're both hydrocarbons and they're non-polar covalent. Okay, so I'm going to stop the video here and we're going to take a look at the actual lab that we did.